Okay, Rabosai, we are now on Daf Peches Amid Beis, and we're up to Shochach Rabo. So let's just make sure that we all have the place. It's about halfway through the Amud, a little bit further. Or if you want to count up from the bottom of the Amud on Peches Amid Beis, I would say it's about 20 lines up from the bottom. You'll see the two dots. And the beginning of the line is Kol HaSeudos Tluyos B'Kohen Gadol, B'Rab Gamliel, excuse me. And then it says Shachach. So the Mishnah tells us, Shachach Rabo Masha Amar Lo. If the Eved was commissioned to bring a Korban Pesach on behalf of his Rav, and the Rav told him exactly which Pesach he should get, whether or not it's a Tleh or a Gdi, and lo and behold, the Eved forgot exactly what his instruction was. And the Mishnah says that both Karbanos are invalid, meaning the Rav cannot eat from the Karban. And in this case, where it was Shachach, they're potter from Pesach Sheni. Omar Abaye. Abaye is going to limit this Mishnah, but also give us an insight into the underlying reasoning of this Mishnah. Lo shanu ela sheshachach li akar zrika. At the time of the Zrikas HaKarban, the Eved remembered exactly what his instruction was. At that moment in time, when the Zrika was implemented, the basar was royal achila. In other words, at that point, we knew that the melech would eat. The Rav would eat from lamazog and the tleh, and the Eved's karban was the gdi. So at the moment of zrika, everything was crystal clear, and that's called chazi lachila. The Pesach is royal achila. So that, says Abai, validates the Zrika. And that's going to explain why there's no need for Pesach Sheni. Avol Shachach Lifnei Zrika. Oh, now we have a problem. Because already at the time of the Zrika, it was undetermined whose minui was on which of these two karbanos. Is therefore the Izrik Dam Lo Havi Chazi Lachila. Which carbon are you going to eat from? And in such a case, you're excluded from both carbonos. Because on each carbon, whether it's the Gdi or the Tleh, we're always going to apply the principle of this is not a certain minui. Again, if at the time of the Zrika they knew exactly which carbon matched up with which memuna and who is manui. Again, they forgot it later, but at that time, the carbon is kasher. Why the minui is valid, they knew exactly, and we need certainty at the time of the minui, we have it. But if they forgot already before the zrika, then the zrika itself was undetermined, and therefore the entire entity of minui is completely invalid. Now, what happens to someone who was not part of a minui, and he wasn't yotzei the mitzvah of Korban Pesach on the 14th of Nisan? Is chayovim lasos Pesach Sheni. In the Reisha, which is our Mishnah, says Abaye, at the time of the Zrika, they knew exactly which carbon belonged to who, and therefore the carbon was brought behechsher. And at that moment in time, if not for the shichacha, the basar could be eaten by its proper bailim. In such a case, there's no Pesach Sheni. Why? Because you already fulfilled your obligation for Pesach Richa. But if already at the time of the Zrika they had forgotten which minui, belongs to which person, and that invalidates the minui, then, my friend, you're out of the ballpark as far as Pesach Rishon is concerned. I shouldn't say ballpark. I should say maybe a football stadium. My wife says that they're watching, well, now it's already over by now. They're watching the Super Bowl. She failed to tell me who played in the Super Bowl. Not that I would know the names anyway. I'm so, but you know, Eshat Torah has a what's it called? What's it called in football in the middle of the game, you know, after they finish the first half? Anyway, there's a period of advertisements, you know, during the middle of the game.
Halftime.
What's it called? Halftime. So the Eshat Torah, I don't know exactly technically how you link up to it, maybe through WhatsApp. I don't know exactly how, but you could watch a halftime show and not see all the shtuyot of the commercials, which cost $2 million for every 60 or 30 seconds, whatever. But you could watch Rabbi Y.Y. Jacobson give a whole shir, you know, during the halftime. And somehow the media, the secular media, got hold of Rabbi. This is all a few hours ago, by the way. They also heard what he had to say, and they started talking about it on the secular media. I mean, it sounds like Mashiach is here already. All right. Anyway, so this is Abaye's thesis. Let's just review. When does the Mishnah say that there's not going to be a Pesach Sheni, neither for the Rav nor for the Eved? That's because they knew at the time of the Zrika which carbon belongs to who. And the Shichcha took place after the Zrika. But if the Shichcha took place as Abai before the Zrika, then they are Nidachim, Dochim Osam LePesach Sheni, because the entire entity of the Minui was invalid, and therefore the Zrika is not. Now, the Gemara is going to present another Lishna, and according to the second transmission, Abaye made his statement not as a qualification of a Mishnah, but rather as a qualification of a Brisa. Ika de Basilea Brisa. And the Brisa says, Chamisha shenis arvu oros pischeim. Debozeh. Okay, now there are 5 people right this minute in the Azara bringing their carbon Pesach. Now the oros, the skins, because it's not a kodshim, are now divvied up amongst the bilim. Each bilim on the carbon gets the hides. Now, all the hides got mixed up. We don't know which hide belongs to Reuven, Shimon, Levi, etc. And what do they discover on the hides? A mum, which means that one of the 5 karbanos sachim was possible. But we don't know whose Pesach was possible because we have no way of linking up the hide with the lamb itself. Every single carbon is now a suffix, whether it's possible because it was a balmum. So we have to get rid of all of them. And now we have to ask a different question. One of the 5 individuals, one of the 5 gentlemen, did not fulfill his mitzvah of carbon Pesach. And every one of these 5 has to ask himself, am I the one? Am I the culprit? So what's the option over here? Kulam yotzei lebeis hasreifa, that none of them are going to be able to eat the carbon, but there's one of them who wasn't yotzei the mitzvah of carbon, it was a balas mum. And that person needs Pesach Sheni, because he did not fulfill his chiyuv in Pesach Rishon, but we don't know who he is. So why don't we do the following? Let's make a cartel, and all 5 of them will bring one joint carbon Pesach Sheni. We don't know which one of them needs the Pesach Sheni, but who cares? Dr. Bryce said, name Turim Milasos Pesach Sheni. What was this, a din of Rov? I mean, what kind of halach is this? Now, the Gemara is going to ask that question soon. In any event, the statement of Abaye differentiating between Kodem Zrika and Liachar Zrika was made in the context and added on to this brisa. Abaye lo shanu. When do we say that these 5 gentlemen are all part from Pesach Sheni? Ella At what point did we have a latest asafek? Which one of the five karbanos was possible? That was after the zrika. The be'idn the izrik dam mia havi chazi lachila. I'm not sure exactly what Abai means, but let's just translate the words. Abai is saying that since at the time of the zrika, it was crystal clear which Pesach belonged to whom, there was no tarovis. So the tarovis of the oros took place when? After the zrika. In such a case, they don't need a carbon pesach. I mean a sheni. Why? The beidna the izrik dam mia havi chazi lachila. Now, what was chazi lachila? All five? Now, that's impossible. One of the five is a balas mum. We don't know that, but we'll find out later. So the words of Abai chazi lachila relate to 4 out of the 5. So again, if you pinpoint the moment of zrika, at that moment in time, 4 out of the 5 Balei HaKarman could eat from that Pesach. Because at this point there was no tarovis. Again, we're going to have a problem here because one of the 5 could not eat the karma. Because it turns out there was a balmum. But at this point, there was no tarovis. So at the point of zrika, if there's no tarovis, then certainly 4 out of 5 can eat the basa. Avol this arvul ifnei zrika, if the mixture took place before the zrika, so already at the time of the zrika, no one would be able to eat the basa because it's undetermined which one of the 5 is the proud owner or not so proud owner of a carbon that's possible. Is then chayav lassus pesach sheni. In other words, the chiyuv of pesach sheni says Abai is going to be determined one way or the other at the moment of zrika. If at the moment of zrika there was no taroves and 4 out of 5 of the bailim could eat from that carbon, then there's no pesach sheni. And again, the Gemara is going to raise the question: what do you mean there's no pesach sheni? 1 out of the 5 desperately needs a pesach sheni. We just don't know who he is, and yet the Brisa says they're all potter from Pesach Sheni. Says Abaye, they're all potter from Pesach Sheni because at the moment of Zrika there was no taroves, and 4 out of 5 were Yotzei the mitzvah of Pesach Sheni because it was at that moment in time it was royal achila, and therefore the akrava, which culminates and is clinched with the Zrika, was kidasu kidin. Again, what's going to be with that 5th guy? We don't know who he is. That's a problem. But kulam p'turim pesach sheni. However, in a case where there was a tarovis already before the moment of zrika, so right at that point, none of the 5 bailim could eat the karma because each one had to say, mine was the one perhaps that had the yabolis on it. Yabelis is then. Since none of them had a carbon that was roy le achila at the moment of zrika, they all are chayiv in Pesach Sheni. So the Gemara now wants to know, how do we relate these 2 traditions one to the other? We have the first tradition that Abai was making his comment on the Mishnah. And the second tradition is that Abai made his comment on the Brisa. Wherein lies the machlokas? The Gemara says the following: Man de masni amas nisin. If you take the first lishna, that Abai's comment was on the Mishnah, is kolshkein abraisa. It goes without saying that Abai's comment is appropriate. It fits to the Brisa. Why is this so? What's the logic of the Kal V'chomer? In the case of the Mishnah, the carbon itself is not possible. We didn't find the mum in the carbon. So that the carbon, the basar carbon, is royal achila in and of itself. We don't know who is money on which Pesach, because Shachach, he forgot. Now, if he forgot already at the time of Zrika Saddam, so Abai says that in such a case, Kulam Ptur. I'm sorry. So let me get this straight again. I made a mistake. If at the time of the Zrika he forgot, then Kulam Chayav. They're all Chayav in Pesach Sheni because there was no possibility of eating the carbon because the Zrika was already post Shichacha. How much more so, says the Gemara in the Brisa? Why? In the Brisa, there's a problem of Psula Guf. Why? Because there's the Abeles. And therefore, if the Basar itself is not Roy Lachila, and each one of these people who is the proud owner of the Pesach is now in a suffix situation rather, as to whether or not he's the Bailam of a Balmum, with a Psula Guf, for sure, he cannot be Yotzei the Pesach, and therefore Chayovim Lasos Pesach Shem. But let's understand again. Here's the Kavachom. If Abai says, right, that what the Mishnah says that they're Pturim for Pesach Sheni, that's because the Safek and the Shichacha emerged after the Zrika, and then they're all parted from Pesach Sheni. But if the Safek and the Shichacha emerged before the Zrika, they're all Chayiv in the Pesach Sheni. How much more so? And that's a case where the problem is not in the Gufa carbon. There's no psul in the carbon. The question is whose money on the carbon. How much more so would Abai say that they're all chayiv in the Pesach Sheni if they find out that one at the time before the Zrika, they find out that one of them is holding on to a Balmum because the Sarvu Oros say him. If Abai is talking about the Brisa, then Avol Maslisin Lo, he will be Machayev them all in the Korban Pesach in the case where there's a Psula Guf in the Brisa, where, again, before the Zrika, we find out that one of them has a Mum. It's Avon the Ksherim Ninu, but in the case of the Mishnah, all the Korbanos are Ksherim. So as far as the dam is concerned, the dam itself, meaning inherent in the carbon, is royal Zrika. Not so in the case of the Brisa where there's a Psula Guf. If only they would remember, jolt the memory at the time of the Zrika, then it would be royal Lachila. That's not true in the Brisa. Reminding yourself where the Yabelis is not going to help you because it's a Balas Mum. And now the Gemara adds 3 words: Klapi Shmaya Galia. What happens in the following case? Says Abai. The Shichacha took place before the Zrika. And the Gemara is saying that they're all potter, even in this case, from Pesach Shem. Because our second tradition has it that Abai's comment was on the Brisa, not on the Mishnah. So in the case of the Brisa, there's no way, no how that this carbon that has the Abelis on it could possibly be royal Achila. It's the whole enterprise of the carbon is possible. It's Psula Guf. It's got a Abelis. whichever one it is, we don't know which one of the 5 Pesachim, but you can't change the fact that given this suffix, the Zrika is not going to facilitate Achilas HaKarban in any shape or form. It's not even a Havami. There's no way under the heavens that this, even Klape Shmaya, that this particular carbon, we don't know which it was, would be royal achil. So that suffix is now written in stone. And at the time of the Zrika, as a result of that suffix, which is chal on each one of the 5, there's no possibility of achil. But in the case of the Mishnah, here we're going to extend the Mishnah and we're going to apply the principle of kulam pturim, right? That's what it says in the Mishnah. Even in a case where the shichacha emerged or was real before the Zrika, at the time of the Zrika. Why kulam pturim? And the answer is Klape Shmaya Galia. There's no real psul in the carbon. The only thing we're lacking information. The Zrika, in and of itself, if we only knew which carbon belongs to whom, would be valid. There's no psul here at all. None of the 2 animals that are being brought, one on behalf of the Abraham and one on behalf of the Eved, one a Tled, one a Gdi, are possible. There's no psul here. If only we knew, Klape Shmaya, the Zrika of this carbon was for him, and the Zrika of this carbon was for him, Klape Shmaya Galia. In such a case, the Zrika is meaningful, and there's no carbon Pesach Sheni. So that now the Mishnah, even according to Abaye, could apply whether or not the Shichacha happened post the Zrika, which clearly is no Pesach Sheni, or even if the Shichacha took place before the Zrika, there's no Pesach Sheni, because of this svara called Klape Shmaya. Masechet in the Brisa, here's where Abai says that they're going to be chayav in Pesach Sheni. Why are they chayav in Pesach Sheni? Because the tarovis took place before the Zrika. And then it's as a result of this suffix, this tarovis, one of the 5 is possible, one of the 5 karbanos, we have to invalidate all the 5 karbanos. And in such a case, we have to send them packing for Pesach Sheni. That's what comes out if you hold Manda Masni Abraiso. Now here, I wanted to share with you an important note. He says the following. You're telling me Klape Shmaya Galia, and that's why they're potter from Pesach Sheni. Mikomakom, Gam Karbanos Elu Psulim He. The minui is not chal because there was shichacha, and if there's shichacha, there's no definite minui on either one of these karbanos. And a carbon without a minui, in the case of a carbon pesach, is possible. So what good is it to tell me Klape Shmaya Galia? What role does that svara play? He says, Afal Pi, She Efshali Ochlam, the 2 karbanos, that of the Rav and that of the Eved, are possible. You can't eat from them. Again, when I hear these words, it drives me nuts. Ein psulam chamer kolkach, kimo benimtza mum biechad mehem. Even she'ein psulam beguf hakarban. I don't catch it. I mean, I'm a big fan of the first Lishna, Manda Masni Amasnisin. That even in the case of the Mishnah, where Klape Shmaya Galia, I would still send them packing for the Pesach Sheni because the two karbonos are possible. So he quotes here Sfas Emes. I'm a little bit skeptical, but let's give it a shot. I mean, I'm not skeptical about the Sfas Emes, don't get me wrong. I mean, he was a genius of geniuses. Here, Sfas Emes, Shekol Shapsul Bizrika, who begufa karbon, Klomar, Shema she'ena Pesach roy lachilu machmas gufa Pesach, is kol shalom is bar b'shas hazrika ein eze karbon roy lachilu, ein hazrika nechsheves l'shem achila, v'lo yoel mashi is bar achakach shakarbon ze roy lachilu. Masha ein kenem atam she'ena Pesach nechal. Einu mishum gufa Pesach el mishum she'en yodim mi nimna olav dai b'mashin yizkuru echad achar kach v'yuchel lechol mimenu k'dei lahachshav ezrikas hagdam shehi l'shem achil. He says the following, if I understand correctly, that what we need is a zrika l'shem achila. So if there's a psul in the gufa carbon, it's nonsensical to set up a zrika l'shem achila. What do you mean? The carbon is possible. So again, masha ena pesach roy l'achila hu machmas gufa pesach. That's the abelis. V'lo nisbar b'shas hazrika eze carbon roy l'achila. In such a case, ein hazrika nechsheves l'shem achila. Psa'anaya psul in the zrika. The zrika is not called a zrika l'shem achila. Aval im atam she'ein ha-pesach nechal eino mishum gufa pesach el mishum she'ein yodim bo mi nimna olav. We can generate a zrika l'shem achila in the case where we don't know which of these two gentlemen is money on which of these two psachim. That could be a zrika l'shem achila. Why? Kevan shem yizku achar kach. All they have to do is, jolt their memory, start flashing pictures of different psachim, and maybe they'll remember. Is then yuchlu lechol mimenu. So the Kohen HaZorek has in mind the possibility that they will eat from this carbon if only they would remember. V'zeh dai lahachshiv ezrikas hadam shehizrika l'shem achil. I have only one problem with this Sfas Emes. Let's go back to the case of Psul HaGuf. In 4 out of the 5, there is no Yabelis. The carbon is kosher. So you're telling me that the Kohen HaZorek could not have in mind L'Shem Achila. Why? What happens if we clarify the suffix? Eliyahu Hanavi comes and he says, this is the culprit, meaning Reuven is the one who owns the R, that has a mum in it. It's his carbon that's a Baal mum. Why doesn't that theoretical possibility allow for the Kohen to have a Zrika L'Shem Achila? You're telling me that in the case of the Eved and Shikha, you can have a Zrika L'Shem Achila, even though they know about the Shikha before the Zrika. It's nevertheless a Zrika L'Shem Achila. Why? Because the Kohen has to be aware of the theoretical possibility that in a jiff, they'll remember exactly which carbon belongs to which one and who's the manui. I don't understand. Burzon. I mean, again, it's not, the Sfas Emes has no problem, but I have a problem. Why don't you apply the same logic in the case of a Psul HaGuf? Okay, you're right, it's a Psul HaGuf. It's more chamur, as Tosfos says. Fine. But the same possibility of avoiding the suffix, like in the case of Shikha, where you might jolt your memory, remember, you might figure out whose Pesach of Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, Yisachar has the R with the Abelis on it. And if that be the case, then on behalf of the other four, you could certainly have a Zrika L'Shem Achila. Now, you might ask me, well, there's one carbon that's mufka from Achila because the whole carbon is possible. It's got a mum in it. So how could you tell me a Zrika L'Shem Achila? But the answer is the coin is going to have a Zrika L'Shem Achila for all five carbonos because any one of them. So the fact that he has a kavana L'Shem Achila in the wrong carbon, meaning in the whole potpourri, he has a kavana L'Shem Achila on that carbon, which is about mum. All right, so give him patch for that. I mean, what was his fault? Shuldik, I mean, he had kavana L'Shem Achila because 4 out of the 5 were ksherim. So what is this Fasem is telling me here? Again, if you want to tell me something which I don't understand, meaning that this psul is more chomer than this psul, one is inherent in the carbon and one is extraneous. Okay, I'm not a happy camper, but at least the words make sense. But to tell me that the difference is because you can have a Zrika B'Shem Achila in the case of the Eved because maybe he'll remember, why shouldn't that logic apply to the case of psul?
Maybe it's also to have a Zrika at all for a carbon that's possible.
So that's a different issue. In other words, what if, we know that one of the 5 carbonos is possible? Right. Is he allowed to have a Zrika on all 5? I don't know. I would say, I mean, what's the Isser of having a Zrika? Again, I wouldn't be Zorik the carbon of a possible, but if I don't know which one is possible, you're raising a different issue. I'm focused on this this one line in this Fas Emes. Let's just see what time it is. Oh, okay, we'll have to stop here. So let me make a note of where we got up to before we close shop. So if I don't write the note to myself, I might not remember tomorrow. So we're up to Omar Mar. Omar Mar. Okay, then. So let me wish you all a great day, and thank you so much.